Hi, you're listening and watching The Leadership Enigma, a globally ranked, award-winning podcast where we are going from strength to strength. This is going to be the first episode of 2025, and we are starting with a bang. I think we need to call this particular episode The Master of Disaster, because I've been very much looking forward to speaking to my guest today, because he is a leader, and a leader who has always found himself in times of crisis. So, Dr. Thom Mayer is the first medical director for the NFL Players Association and was the originator of the NFL concussion guidelines, but he's also found himself in situations such as being the command physician at the Pentagon, the rescue and recovery operation at 9/11. How about also the incident commander for the Anthrax outbreak in Washington? How about the emergency team going to Ukraine following the outbreak of war? This is someone who has followed the opportunity to lead in crisis when the stakes are hard. Trust me, you do not want to miss this particular episode of The Leadership Enigma. What a start to 2025. Come back to me just after this break. Hi, I'm Adam Pacifico, and welcome to The Leadership Enigma, a world-ranked, award-winning podcast that's insatiably curious as regards what leaders do, how they do it, and importantly, why. We'll delve into the human doing, but even deeper into the human being and the power of human-centered leadership to drive sustainable change. So whether you're an entrepreneur, business owner, corporate executive, each week we speak to global experts, academics, rising stars, ambitious upstarts and disruptors, as together we will discover that success leaves clues. Thom, it's a warm welcome to The Leadership Enigma. How are you?
I am great. I am thrilled to be on. I really admire your work. I love the whole concept of the leadership enigma. So I've been looking forward to this very much.
That's high praise indeed. And what a wonderful way to start 2025, which, as this will be the first episode of 2025. So, Thom, I did a very, very potted history there of how you seem to have found an opportunity to lead in crisis. Let me ask you this question. When you first became a medic, when you first became the medical professional that you are, did you think you'd end up working in these kinds of situations?
No, I don't think that you can ever prepare totally or aspire. I've just been given a lot of opportunity. I started wanting to serve others, to particularly those that were sickest. I'm an emergency physician, as you know. And the opportunities came along as they did. I often get people say to me, how do I build my resume to get a job like yours as the medical director of the NFL Players Association? And my answer is always the same. I got that job on August 1st, 2001, when Corey Stringer, a tackle for the Vikings, died of heat stroke. And Gene Upshaw, then the executive director of the NFL Players Association, and arguably the best left guard in history, he's in the NFL Hall of Fame in Canton, called me and said, Doc, you got to step up and do this. Well, he didn't review a bunch of resumes. He called me because we were best friends. And we were best friends because his youngest and my youngest were best friends. And Gene and I had coached T-ball together, coached football together, had countless dinners together, probably too much Silver Oak Cabernet, but that's a different story. And so he called me because he trusted me. And my point is, don't build resumes, build relationships. And those relationships, without fail, have been the things that have taken me to the front lines of crisis across the arc of my career.
You know, Thom, I always say that this podcast for me has always been a humbling experience, but what it's done is it's provided me with perhaps my most valuable asset, and that is the relationship and the network of relationships from all the incredible people that I speak to. Because but for this podcast, I would never have had the opportunity to meet you and chat to you and have this conversation. So I am always incredibly grateful to the podcast for that. So I love that as a starting point. Let me, as always, go backwards to go forwards. What prompted you to go into medicine?
Well, I was a football player, and many people football to go to college so that they can get a scholarship to get educated.
Yep.
I was quite the opposite. I went to college to continue playing football because after high school, you had to go to college if you're going to continue to play. And I had no concept of a doctor. I mean, it was to me a doctor was somebody who sewed up my face when I got too close to somebody's cleat or helmet, or someone putting his finger a place I didn't want it and telling me to cough. And neither of those things were particularly attractive to me. So I chose about a third of the way through my freshman year playing football. The advisor said, "You got to choose a major," and I said, "A major what? You didn't say anything about major when you were recruiting me." "No, a major field of study." So I chose theology
Right.
for a lot of reasons. I was always interested, as you passionately are, in how people think, why they think, what do they do, what does it mean, what are the results of that. And so theology made sense. And uh, about 2 years into my theology major and my football career, my theology professor and a biology professor pulled me aside and said, "Has it ever occurred to you, you might have more influence in life as a physician than as a theology professor?" Well, I was, forward fast, a linebacker, and I hadn't thought of anything, but I trusted these guys. So I started taking pre-medicine courses that were freshman designed as when I was a junior, which led interesting places and never had a regret. But the role, of course, of serendipity in all of our lives is, the but for the
Yeah.
conversation that they, but for the potential that they saw in me in an area that I had no aspirations and no dreams towards. So I think the influence we have on others can never be understated.
See, I love that because a little bit like my career, I think it's serendipity and opportunity when it knocked. I took it with both hands. And so it's interesting now as the younger generation come through, just how much can they plan their careers and just how much have they just got to be alive to the opportunity. And as you said at the start, the power of building those relationships to see where it takes us. So it's interesting. I'm also getting clues now about linking the medicine to obviously football, NFL, and we're going to come on to that. But tell me, how did you get into really the acute world of crisis medicine? And I'm going to come back to the issue in relation to 9/11. But how did you start to go in that direction?
Well, when I was training, I was always drawn toward the sickest of the sick. Now, I didn't want people to be sick,
Yeah.
but when they were sick, I wanted to be the guy that was there in times of crisis. I wanted to be the guy that people looked to and said, he calms down when things get the absolute worst and everyone else is panicking. So once I was in medicine, I did aspire to, I want to take care of the sickest people, which drew me to emergency medicine, of course, which is where the sickest
Yeah.
people come. And as you go through that arc, you come to a lot of leadership leading conclusions. I'm sure we'll talk about that as
We
well.
will.
But the ability to in times of disaster, true disaster, to be able to step up and to reflect that calm demeanor, the calm actions, and the ability to say A, B, C, all the way to Z, and meaning you can progress through what needs to be done while others might be floundering. And that was just I love that, and I love being able to influence others to feel the same way.
So, what do you think really was the draw then for continuously being in an environment where Tom, you had no idea what was coming next? It could change at the drop of the hat in a split second, and you're now working in an environment where life or death is almost the flip of a coin to some degree. What's the draw for you for that on a continual basis? Because you've continually sought out or been involved in roles where that has been the environment.
Well, there's something wrong with people who run, when there's a fire, there's an explosion, there's bioterrorism, normal people run away. And that's just a normal
Yep.
reaction. And I accept that and I encourage that. I'm just not wired that way. And my colleagues are not wired that way. When there's cacophony, when there's chaos, we run towards it, knowing that our training, our demeanor, our ability to bring calm to the storm is going to have to happen. And it's just a blessing to us to be the people who make it happen.
So let's talk a little bit about an example of just that, because I know you were the command physician at the Pentagon, the rescue recovery operation at 9/11. I mean, listen, we all remember where we were. on that particular day. And we all remember where we were when, unfortunately, London suffered a similar
Sure.
series of incidents on 7/7. So help us understand, how did you become that command physician for that Pentagon recovery and rescue mission back on 9/11?
Well, it fits with what I said in terms of it's relationships, not resumes. I was the chairman of the emergency department of the level one, which is the highest level in the U.S. trauma center
Yep.
that was nearest to the Pentagon, and I calmed that situation down. But I was also the medical director for the Fairfax County Fire and Rescue, the paramedic crew, the firefighters that were responsible for the rescue and recovery operation.
Right.
So I was not in the military. People often assume, probably at least partially because of my demeanor and my uh, general way I look
Yeah.
and perhaps act. But I wasn't in the military. My son was a Marine infantry officer later, probably relating to 9/11, quite frankly, in the role I had.
Yeah.
But my point was, I was invited down there. They wanted someone who could be the command physician, and that may sound like some made up title, but an incident command, that's a formal title. There's an orange vest with fluorescent that says command physician
Yeah.
on it, and that person, in my case, and it was me at the Pentagon, is responsible for keeping people safe, for understanding when those crews can go in that building and when they can't go in that building. What are the factors involved in making that decision? Because if I tell those people to rush in and that building collapses, now we've got even more casualties. So it was an invitation. And I think all opportunities to lead, in my experience, have been invitations built on reputations and relationships.
So let me just ask this. For the Pentagon operation, were you at the Pentagon itself, or were you at another venue receiving casualties as they were brought through?
Well, the answer is both. I
Right.
started at the trauma center,
Yep.
and very quickly after that, I was asked, hey, Doc, can you please come down to the Pentagon? Somebody's got to run this operation down here. And, it's an interesting story, but in our trauma center, we have a red phone in the communications center,
Right.
and that red phone connects only to the Secret Service, because when the president's on the south side of the river, we're the designated trauma center. That phone had never rung before.
Wow.
And I was standing in the command center watching the planes go in to the Twin Towers at the World Trade Center, and the phone rang. And I looked at the nurses and they said, "We're not answering that. You answer it, Doc." And I picked it up, and they said, "This is Dulles Tower. We have an aircraft unaccounted for. Prepare for a disaster." And I shut down the phone and immediately declared a disaster, saying that plane is going to crash somewhere in our area within the next few minutes. And sure enough, it turned out to be at the Pentagon.
Wow. So not only were you having to deal with a scenario like no other, this was also a rapidly emerging situation, because I remember now, as we were watching things live on television, no one really knew what was going on. How do you operate in that environment where there is a chaotic environment at the Pentagon, but there's also an emerging chaotic environment where you just don't know, is there now going to be a secondary explosion? Are we actually safe in this vicinity? Just how far reaching is this incident? What are you thinking at that point, Thom?
Well, I think you're thinking about eventualities
Yeah.
and putting your training to work, because we certainly did. That plane went in at 500 miles an hour, and that's a scene that you don't forget. Everyone, including me, who drove up there, I came in by helicopter, but most people drove in,
Yeah.
thought, this can't be real. This looks like a Hollywood movie set.
Mm.
It was very much real, Adam, as you know. And you begin to run eventualities through. It occurred to us, for example, probably that if there had been an explosive device on that plane, it had probably exploded on impact.
Yeah.
But there could have been toxic fumes. There could have been, sarin gas. There could have been all kinds of bioterrorism effects, which we later saw with anthrax. And so both by training and nature, you begin to run down the list and look at threats and look at ways to respond to that threat and get the best possible information you can to be able to make the best decision you can. And go ahead, please.
No, you've just piquing my interest, Tom, because there are so many questions. We're going to have to do another episode, Tom. I was at Mass General a couple of weeks ago over in Boston, which is obviously linked to Harvard as well. And we were chatting to the emergency medical team there. And one of the very experienced doctors said that when there is a critical incident or there is something coming into the emergency room, when she gets into the lift, she knows the lift is not the fastest thing. She almost takes that time just to pause and breathe before those doors open and she is in all kinds of a melee. A lot of CEOs talk about the need to just sometimes pause or strategically think. You're on the helicopter, you're heading to the Pentagon, you're seeing things which are things that you can never unsee and most people will never see. Tom, do you deliberately pause and just take a breath before all hell breaks loose? Or is it almost instinctive and automatic and you don't know? Was there a point there where you just thought to yourself, breathe, Tom, we're about to enter something unimaginable?
Again, by training and experience, I always tell people, pause, reflect, and reconsider. Pause to realize, when those, and I know the people at Mass General extremely well. We do our research with the NFLPA there, and their EMS, emergency medicine crew and program, superb, who you're talking about. But when those lift doors open, you have to say to yourself, pause, because when I walk out, I'm in charge. Do I want to be someone who's yelling and screaming and waving my arms, or do I want to be someone who reflects calm and calms those down who are yelling and screaming and waving their arms, to let them know it will be okay? Reflect, meaning prepare for what might be there, and reconsider that what you may expect is likely not going to be the total picture that you actually see when you're there.
Right.
And I think that's true of leaders in every area of life. As you know, I believe that everyone is a leader. Lead yourself and lead your team. So that pause, reflect, and reconsider is not just good advice. I mean, it's a discipline of leading.
I love that. And am I right in thinking, Tom, that can actually happen over a short space of time? Just like a lift ride or just getting out of a whatever mode of transport you're in. It's just almost a deliberate period of time for you to be able to do those things.
It's absolutely true, Adam. And obviously, I've studied your podcast and listened to many of them. It's the disciplines. It's and not a list of 12 things, but a list of 3 things or 4 things, so that it's very easy to be able to say, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to pause, reflect, and reconsider. And I think all leaders have to do that, particularly in the midst of crisis. And the issue, of course, as you know, is we're always going to be in crisis in this dynamic world in which we live.
Yeah, well, without a doubt. This is a difficult question, perhaps, Tom, but is there a real takeaway or standout piece of learning for you, having dealt with the Pentagon Rescue and Recovery operation at 9/11? Is there something that's a standout for you?
Yes, and it's a bit controversial. So if I give offense to you or your listeners, my apologies, but it's for a reason.
Right.
And that is that, when you look at the gates of hell, and that truly, I mean, my theology training instantly pulled up Dante, in the middle of the road of my life.
Yeah.
I found myself wholly lost in a dark wood. And that's what it felt like. I mean, those words literally went through my mind as I walked over and put that vest on. But the part that might be controversial is, Marshall Goldsmith famously says, we always criticize people who suck up, but why is it that we can see it in everyone else, but we can't see it in ourselves? And what I learned at the Pentagon is stop sucking up, start sucking down. And again, if that gives offense, my apology. But what I mean by that is, when I arrived there was we call them Jersey barriers, the concrete barriers, many places in London, still up after 7/7, appropriately so. And I was in charge in front of that, meaning the Pentagon. Behind that were 32 generals, 2 stars or above, all great men and great women. And those were their people in that building.
Right.
So they were there to help in any way that they could. I could have spent my time sucking up to those generals, and it would have done me no good. It would have done, far more importantly, the people in that building, both alive and those who passed away, my firefighters, my paramedics, my structural engineers, no good.
Yeah.
Because I can't protect them if I'm over there talking to the potentates,
Yeah.
the big shots and all that. Sucking down means who did I listen to? I listened to the structural engineers. I listened to the firefighters, the paramedics, the suppression experts, the FBI recovery team, whose job it was to go in and get the evidence when available. Our urban search and rescue teams, including one of my best friends, Dr. Dan Hanford, whose job it was to go in and either find people or find bodies, both of which were critically important. And I can't protect them unless I suck down. Again, no offense to anyone. But the point is, the answers in life are not above us. They're within and among us. And the faster we learn that, the better off we are. Because we shouldn't be worrying about the C-suite. We should be worrying about the we-suite, the people who do the work.
Thom, there's no apology needed at all. This isn't controversial. This is about real life lessons that you learn in extreme scenarios. And, we have this conversation with leaders don't we, all the time in relation to sometimes you're not the best person to lead. You might be the most senior, the most experienced, the most, with the most tenure. But sometimes you've got to be that servant leader. Sometimes you've got to follow. Sometimes you've got to allow those who are better placed to deal with the incident to get on with it. This is what you're talking about. It's that humility as well to say, I may have two stars on my shoulder, but it's not me. It's not me right now. It's you.
Well, I'm a huge fan of quotes, as you know, and my favorite humility quote is, the two, one from C.S. Lewis, of course, which says humility consists not of thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. But my favorite is Golda Meir, the former Israeli prime minister. One of her cabinet ministers at a critical meeting was proclaiming his humility. We've all seen that. And she turns to him and says, "Don't be so humble. You're not that great." Great words.
I love those. I'll be looking to use those because humility is very much one of the 8 components of human-centered leadership. So let me move things forward. Thom, you found yourself again and again in these critical situations, and you were also the incident commander for the Anthrax outbreak in Washington. Just help people understand contextually a little bit about that scenario.
Well, time-wise, 2001 for me was an incredible year. August 1st, 2001, I become the medical director of the NFL Players Association.
Yeah.
September 11th, we've talked about. And then on October 19th, suddenly we've got this anthrax crisis, the first bioterrorism attack on U.S. soil. And somebody's got to step up. And it actually was me and Dr. Hanfling who were co-incident commanders of the issue.
Right.
There's a fascinating story, and that is, the CDC was saying, no offense to the CDC, but they were saying the famous Daschle letter that went to the Senate office building, and their wisdom from above, Moses from the mountaintops, was unless you were in the 3rd or 4th floor of the southeast wing of the Hart Senate office building between the hours of 7 a.m. and 10 p.m., you have nothing to be concerned about whatsoever. Well, fine, except on that Sunday, I got a call from the emergency department. One of my docs had a postal worker who said, "I think I may have anthrax." Come on. And she followed the CDC's guidelines. Again, no offense to the CDC, that man would have died because she was trusting her instincts, the gestalt, the sense of, he just doesn't look right to me.
Right.
She gets a CT of his chest and he's got mediastinitis. His chest is dissolving with blood as a result of the anthrax attack. And so we jumped on him very quickly and gave him triple antibiotic therapy. That was not what was recommended at the time, and saved his life. And the next day, another postal worker comes in. So I think that humility, that ability to listen, and our schools should do a lot better job, particularly our B schools, our medical schools, our business schools, at teaching people to listen. And when you listen carefully, you have to be silent. You can take those 6 letters, listen, rearrange them into a more powerful word, which is silent. So our doc, Cecile Murphy's her name, she deserves to be mentioned by name,
Yeah.
listened by being silent and watched this guy and changed the trajectory of how we manage bioterrorism and how we manage inhalational anthrax so that it's now a treatable disease.
Wow. And so, do you think there is something from the previous incidents which you were able to carry forward into this scenario?
Oh, very much so. I mean, rewind to pause, reflect, and reconsider.
Yeah.
So you get that call, whether the call is to come down to the Pentagon on 9/11, the call is to become the NFLPA medical director to inhalational anthrax. But I might say to your listeners, that call for them can be anything. The challenge of raising a child, that a single mother is every bit as much a leader as a CEO of a corporation is. So all those challenges, those crises through which we go, are a chance to do just that. It's not something we should aspire to, being a leader. It's something we should embrace and then inspire others to lead all day, every day in their lives. Because I think that switches us from this wistful, worthless word, someday, someday I'll be a leader, to the actionable word, today. Today I am a leader. The question is not, will I be a leader? I will be a leader. The question is, how will you lead? And is it consonant with, as you say, the eight concepts of servant leadership?
And we're going to come on to the book you wrote, Leadership is Worthless, but Leading is Priceless, because I'm going to almost, all roads will lead to that place in relation to your perspectives. But let me deal with two further incidents, because you were also part of the emergency team in Ukraine following the war outbreak. How did that come about?
It really was, you remember that Peter Drucker said
Yes.
that all workers are volunteer workers. And so, the crisis occurs, the invasion occurs. I mean, let's be clear, it's a war now, but it started with an invasion. And that pause, reflect, and reconsider. So I paused, I reflected, how can I help?
Yeah.
And reconsider, well, I'll send money. Many people opened their wallets, and we were lucky enough to open our passports and say, let's go. And it was an honor. It was a privilege. I had people, when I came back, say, microphones in my face with all the reporters and the cameras, saying, you're a hero. And my answer was, I'm no hero. I am no hero. But let me tell you about the 350 heroes that we took care of.
Right.
The Ukrainian people that we were privileged to be a part of taking care of them. And because they had traveled 900 miles from the eastern end of Ukraine to the western end, which is where we were, and they were provided lodging and food and all that. But what they didn't have was doctors.
Right.
And that's what we did. We stepped up and said, yes. In the midst of, there were great pictures taking care of folks in bomb shelters, because missiles were flying over and the sirens were blaring all day and all night. And instead of, saying, well, we're going to the bomb shelter, we're going to sit there, we took our equipment and we examined them, we treated them, and they changed our lives.
Right.
We didn't change theirs. They
Thom,
changed ours.
Gotcha. Thom, when you say we, who's the we? Were there a whole group of you who went out?
It was a mobile emergency team.
Yeah.
So we literally packed up in the morning, took our stuff, and went wherever the patients were. Dave Young, my fellow emergency physician, Leanne Wong, our nurse, Summer Shope, our nurse, Bro, who was our team leader, Steve, who was one of our firefighters, and Earl, who was one of the team leaders. So I mention them by name because they deserve to be mentioned by name.
Okay.
It's a team. It's a team of people. We had never met each other, never crossed paths before, didn't know them, and yet we formed and bonded into a team with pause, reflect, reconsider. Here's the rules of engagement. Here's what we're going to do. So when the air raid sirens did go off, we didn't have to decide. We already knew, let's go to the bomb shelter and let's take care of the folks down there.
What's your number one piece of advice then for someone who's leading a new team? Because it sounds like you were in, as you say, a new team. You hadn't met each other before. And again, the stakes are very, very high. So how do you function at such a high level that quickly when you don't know each other? What's the key to that, Thom?
Unsurprisingly, relationships.
Yeah.
Begin by establishing relationships. and getting to know, you can't lead people if you don't know people.
Mm.
And, some of the greatest coaches of all time, Vince Lombardi said, I may not always like my players, but I must always love them. And you can't love them if you don't know them.
Right.
So establishing those relationships quickly, establishing rules of engagement, making sure people know we're a team and every team member needs to have his input so that we know what we're doing. So, for example, if I'm treating a patient and Summer and Leanne, our nurses, are there and they see something I don't, or they've got a suggestion, different medications, or hey, doc, did you
Yep.
see this? Making sure they know, hey, I don't accept your input. I insist on your input.
Now, a lot of leaders say that they are always time poor, and some people think that it needs a lot of time to really get to know each other well enough for this high performing element to come out. You're talking about building relationships very, very quickly in order to be very high performing, again, very, very quickly. So, tell us a little bit about almost your strategy to build relationships quickly and get some kind of rapport going or relationship going between a set of people who have only just met, but they haven't got huge amounts of time to wait to perform.
Yeah, I think you start by saying thank you. Thank you for volunteering to come. Thank you for being a part of this team. Thank you for the skills that you bring here. Each of our skills are different. Let's recognize what those are and work across boundaries. That goes a long, long way because you might expect a physician to be very authoritarian and I am the boss here. I'll be in charge here. And being able to, the boss, as you know, is someone who thinks that he's the most important person in the room, but the leader is someone who knows that her job is to make sure that everyone in the room feels that they're the most important person in the room.
Yeah, it's a
So
very different thing,
establishing
isn't it?
that tenor out of the blocks is critical.
So, I love this. And this really then takes me on to the NFL discussion, because as you say, you were asked through relationships in a network to take on this role. Just help people understand, in simple terms, Thom, the medical director of the NFL Players Association. What does that mean?
It means I represent the health and safety interests of all 2,500 dues paying active members of our union, because the Players Association is a union, to be
Right.
frank. So I have no obligation other than to them, their wives, their sons, their daughters, their families. And in COVID, I took care of many of their parents
Right.
because of the nature of that. So, my counterpart, his responsibility is to 32 billionaires. That's a different responsibility. It's not a bad responsibility, but it's not the same
Right.
responsibility.
That's a very different
I think,
responsibility, isn't it?
yeah, I think for the leader, pause, reflect, and reconsider is, to whom am I serving? Whom am I serving in this role? And keeping that, bright line becomes important. And therefore, why turn to the generals other than to say, thanks, I'm going to get back to you if I need you, and turning towards the paramedics, firefighters, and structural engineers. So I'm a huge fan, as you are, of Robert Greenleaf, servant leadership, oft discussed, but less often enacted on a day-to-day basis, I would think.
So you said in 2001, I believe, you were asked to take on this particular role because there was the
Yes.
tragic incident of the Vikings player who passed away from a heat stroke. Is that correct?
Heat stroke, inconceivable. And within 3 weeks of the time that happened, we had, I say we because I worked very closely with my then counterpart, Elliot Pellman, medical director for the NFL players, I
Yeah.
mean, NFL itself. We had heat stroke guidelines in place within 3 weeks.
Right.
Done.
Okay.
Because we took an evidence-based approach to what needs to be done, including measuring what we call wet bulb globe thermometer, combination of temperature and humidity readings. And if it's too high, you don't practice, you don't play the game, you change the game from 1 o'clock in the afternoon to 7 o'clock at night, or whatever it takes to keep the player safe.
And I'm assuming that no one had ever even conceived it possible that a player, professional NFL player, would have died as a result of heat stroke. Was it inconceivable, or was it just it
It
never
was
happened before?
inconceivable. I
Right.
mean, when people heard it, it's like, how could that possibly happen?
Mm.
And the answer was that they had trusted what you and I know is the argument from authority. That could be God, of course, from a theological standpoint.
Yeah.
But well, they're NFL physicians. They must know how to take care of heat stroke. Well, the way you take care, I mean, to me, without guidelines, without
Yeah.
disciplines, there are no guardrails. So guidelines are guardrails because of their disciplines of following what needs to be done. And we did the same with the concussion protocols. You kindly mentioned Sean Sansevieri and I, my legal partner in the NFLPA, and I wrote the original concussion
Yeah.
guidelines. Originally, they were resisted. We don't need them. Our docs are really good, all that. Now they're, the NFL and the NFLPA proudly say, hey, this is the top of the heap when it comes to how you manage concussions, traumatic brain injury,
Yes.
in concussion in contact sports.
Now, for some, it may be that was an obvious risk to always try and mitigate, taking into account the nature of the game. I know this also perhaps was brought to the fore of the public consciousness because of the film Concussion with Will Smith.
Sure.
But also, I was in the US 2 weeks ago, and we were just talking before we were recording that we just had the Dolphins player at the Texas Stadium who was injured badly through a helmet-on-helmet collision, treated for 10 minutes on the pitch. All the players were on a knee praying, actually. And I know he's still being treated. So this is a very real issue for the game, and not just for the NFL, because obviously we've got rugby here and we've got lots of other sports that must or are considering concussion protocols. What does it do for you, your job, your ongoing work, when we've still got incidents which are perhaps, do I even say inevitable, Tom, because of the nature of the game, that this will happen every now and again? I mean, what was the impact on you when you saw that just 2 weeks ago?
Well, as soon as it happened, of course, I picked up the phone and started texting. There were 4 emergency physicians from the Level 1 Trauma Center on the field,
Yep.
the pitch, at the time that occurred. And they didn't just happen to show up. We have mandated emergency action plans that have to be drilled for just that eventuality: head injury, spine injury, chest injury, cardiac arrest, and hyperthermia,
Right.
heat stroke. And they have to drill twice a year to show us that. So they didn't happen to show up. They were there in different roles, and I knew all of them personally
Right.
through relationships. They were known to me because of previous prior relationships, a bond between us. They weren't strangers to me,
Right.
as well as the team physicians and the trainers. So my phone lit up, as you might guess, from people with the NFLPA asking me what's going on. And I was able to give them, if not second to second, minute by minute, this is what's going on. I'm watching to make sure, we call it packaging,
Yes.
but meaning getting them on the stretcher, getting them down, immobilizing the head, helmet off, face mask first, so that you can take care of the airway if you have to.
Yeah.
And it was textbook. It cannot be done better than they did it. Similar to the incident with the Buffalo Bills player a couple of years ago in Cincinnati. So it was, I mean, honestly, it brought tears to me to see how well they handled what could have been a catastrophic situation.
And are the concussion guidelines something that is always being reviewed and updated and iterated on? How does that work?
Yeah,
Because I can imagine the game changes.
I'm so pleased you used the term iterated, because to me, any guidelines are guardrails. They're
Yeah.
disciplines that we know how each other's going to act, and those disciplines are important because, and I'll come back to this if we have a second.
Yeah.
Knowing what the other team members are going to do before they do it is a critical part of emergency response, of being the master of disaster. But they have to be iterative. Why? Because the science is iterative. Science changes, if not daily, weekly, monthly, certainly yearly. And so we revisit those protocols in a highly cooperative and collegial fashion with our colleagues at the NFL to say, this is good, but the enemy of the best is good enough.
Right.
And we're not going to be good enough. We're going to iterate. We're going to be iterative in all that we do.
So, medical science must progress. Awareness and understanding will always progress. Has technology played a role in that as well, in relation to even the construction of the helmets or even sensors. I don't know. So that the data is now being utilized to understand the impact on
Yes, the
people.
every concussion in the NFL
Yep.
and every major injury in the NFL is studied, meaning video is taken, and at the Super Bowl there's 38 cameras. At a normal game there's a minimum of 6 cameras. There's usually 12 that are studying and watching those players. So they go in the lab, and they deserve to be mentioned. They're biomechanical engineers at the most elite level in the world.
Right.
For us, it's Dr. Christy Arbergrass and Dr. Barry Myers at Penn and Duke, respectively.
Right.
For the league, it's Jeff Crandall at University of Virginia and Biocore. And these guys have so much mutual respect. There's no, union management going on. It's what does the science tell us? And what they've told us is we can design in both on-field testing and lab testing,
Yep.
better helmets. So the helmets are much safer. The helmet I wore when I played in college wouldn't even be allowed anywhere near the field these days. And that's not just because I played back when the Earth's crust was cooling, but because science marches on. Are we going to march with it? We always say we'll go anywhere the science takes us, but nowhere the science doesn't.
Well, it's good to hear as well that some of those top college teams are not just playing great college football, but they're also involved in, as you say, studying the science and in some ways mitigating some of the risks that the game offers as well. Now, this conversation has been leading because with all of that you have done in this title of the Master of Disaster, and I say that with huge accolade, Thom, is you wrote, leadership is worthless, but leading is priceless. So you have obviously come to a perspective and a point of view on leadership. Let me start with the title. What did you mean by that title?
Well, strangely enough, I give a lot of speeches to organizations, to financial management firms, to manufacturing firms and all that, not just in healthcare. And it's usually around this topic of leading in times of crisis.
Yes.
Like you, I am an information maven. I want to suck up all the sources and read everything I can.
Yeah.
And as I reflected on it, I realized, I looked it up on Amazon. There's 60,000 books on Amazon alone with leadership in the title. There's millions of articles out there. And when I ask my audience, how many of you have read some of those books? Everyone's hand goes up. And then I say, what did it say? And it's surprising how often people draw a blank in terms of what it actually says. And so it led me to this, it really just reflecting on, pause, reflect, reconsider, reflecting on the arc of my career and my experiences, told me, that leadership is worthless because it's just what you say. And anyone can say anything they want. But leading is priceless because it's what you do all day, every day, which leads you to the absolutely necessary corollary that we're all leaders. Lead yourself, lead your team. There are no unimportant people. The team behind the camera and behind the audio, absolutely, we don't get to have this conversation without that, and certainly not of the quality. And in an emergency department, that means that the housekeepers cleaning the floors are very much a part of the team and need to understand that, not just the doctors and the nurses. So, and the second is every leader, and we're all leaders, is a performance athlete, no different than my athletes in the NFL, involved in a cycle of performance, rest, and recovery. Performance, rest, and recovery, unceasingly. And I think we have probably another conversation. We've neglected rest and recovery.
Yeah.
Hence the issues with burnout and moral injury. And then third, the work begins within. The answers are not above us. They're within and among us. So it wasn't meant to be a clever title. It was meant to be the culmination of my reflections over a career.
Well, I'm going to put a number of links into the show notes for this episode so that people can understand how they can connect with you, also how they can get hold of the book as well. But I want to pick up on three things in this particular conversation. I had Angela Cretu come into the studio a couple of weeks ago, a lovely, lovely lady who was the former CEO of Avon. Avon, which was the global cosmetics company, which we all grew up with. I think at one point she said there were 6.5 million social sellers because They were founded in 1886 and they were empowering women to actually sell the beauty products. So it's an incredible business model. She talked, though, about an army of leaders. So this is the question for you is, how does a leader anywhere within a business start to create a culture that everyone is a leader? Because you need an army of leaders in order to really drive change, especially in a chaotic world. What would your kind of initial thoughts be on that? How do we really get an army of leaders truly in an organization?
Yeah, that was a great episode. And I strongly encourage all of your listeners to not only listen to it, but encourage others to do the same. It does, I mean, it fits perfectly with the way I've thought about things, which is that number one is, the answers are not the words on the walls in an organization.
Yeah.
It's the happenings in the halls. So yes, there needs to be a conversation. And do I think as an author that words matter? Just right after I say leadership is just what you say and anybody can say anything. Well, they're valuable only to the extent and precisely to the extent it causes action, positive action of leading in times of crisis.
Behaviors.
So I think we're all, Tom, my friend Tom Peters always says, you're the CEO of Me Inc. And that's true. And so being able to create an organization, not only to say that, not just say team, but play team, so that when we talk about an army of leaders, does that person's actions embody that in times of crisis, the CEO? And the more you do, the more they get it. Oh, I'm in charge. And all of a sudden, there's this beautiful thing that happens. It's like a catalytic reaction that when people embrace the fact, I am a leader. Today, I will lead, not someday, today. The answers are within and among us, not above us, not to be too repetitive. But this wonderful thing happens, and that is victim mentality disappears.
Right.
Because there's no one to blame. There's no one to blame. Well, I would have been a great person, but the boss wouldn't let me. Or I had to follow the rules and it ended up hurting someone. No, that's not the way life, and that's what I think an army of leaders means.
I love that CEO of Me Inc. There's a client of mine who always talks about be the CEO of your own career. And I think that's a powerful statement, isn't it, for people to take ownership of it. I also want to touch on this performance, rest and recovery, because as we hear that, I hope there are lots of people listening and watching this, people will always associate that with elite sport. But it's incredibly relevant to your point for those in corporate life. This has been a very hard year. Next year will be hard, forever changing. The world is on bonkers, on fire, and people are working hard all the time, but sometimes to the detriment of their own well-being. Tell me a little bit about how organizations can really start to embrace this performance, rest, and recovery cycle that you talk about.
Well, you remember that Nietzsche said, he who has a strong enough why can bear almost any how. I happen to, I coupled that with Maslow, who said in many wonderful ways that the only meaningful and lasting change, which is what you're trying to do, I would say, with this podcast,
yes,
it's intrinsically motivated. Do it because the boss says so. Hasn't worked, won't work. And if you don't understand that and you have kids, how's it working when you say, because I'm the mommy, because I'm the daddy?
Yeah.
Just doesn't work. But if you can show them that it's in their own best interests to follow the guidelines, to exercise the disciplines of leading in times of crisis, they'll realize, hey, this is good for me. And so I'm going to continue doing this. Now, it also makes the lives of the people we serve, in my case, patients, better through the course of doing that. But then foot stomping that, to use a military term, by insisting that, hey, our culture is one of rest and recovery. Are you taking care of yourself? Are you getting enough sleep? You know that if you wanted to predict across all decades of life, all-cause mortality, you'd look at two things.
Right.
VO2 max, exercise tolerance.
Yes.
And number two is relationships. My friend and colleague Bob Waldinger at Harvard showed that, and The Good Life is his new book. But it's the best predictor of how long and how well people live, from an exercise tolerance standpoint, was relationships. The number and quality of relationships. Don't build resumes, build relationships. So making sure that you know that, making sure in our performance reviews, are we sitting down and say, tell me about your sleep? Are you getting enough sleep? Tell me about, are you taking advantage of the company's wellness programs? How much exercise are you getting a week? All those kinds of things. It can't just be the words on the walls. It's got to be the happenings in the halls.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Because let's be honest, the dollar is still a major focus for all corporates who want to be around in years to come. So there's a sustainability piece. I get it. But what we're really talking now about is a leader's ability to be congruent in is that they're actually doing what they're espousing to others. So a leader can't be seen just to be work, 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 but then promote this performance, recovery, rest, because it's not congruent.
And do they do it themselves?
Correct.
I mean, does the way in which they live reflect, you want me to do performance, rest, and recovery? Are you doing performance, rest, and recovery? And I've had within the last few weeks, I spoke at a 1,000 people at a meeting,
Yep.
and the CEO said, we had a panel discussion after my talk, and someone asked him from the audience, what's the best way you, the CEO? He said, well, I try to build into my schedule not only that I exercise, but I exercise with the people in my organization.
Right.
What a powerful statement.
That is a great statement, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a great thing.
So I'll also ask you another question. You talked about the leader within, and in some ways it comes back to be the CEO of your own career, or you're the CEO of Me Inc. What thoughts or advice have you got for anyone at any level now to really start to find, identify, and live the leader within? Because this isn't just about being a C-suite executive. This could be the newest intern in a business. And one of my guests, John Amici, said that leadership is the promise of a lived experience for those around you. So we're all leading, not only leading ourselves, but we're having an impact on those around us. What are your thoughts, Tom, in relation to really trying to uncover the leader within?
Well, the great Danish writer Isak Dinesen, her name was really Karen von Blixen, great writer.
Yeah.
The Out of Africa, Meryl Streep and Robert Redford, that's her story. But she said all sorrows can be born if you can put them into a story or tell a story about them. So set aside, all of us are chief storytellers, telling the story of leading to those around us. But I'll tell you a story that encompasses what you're asking. When we had 3 boys, Maureen and I had 3 boys, and now young men, one of whom's visiting us right now with his wonderful wife and their 9-month-old son. And when they were younger, I used to take them to school. Every day I was at home because I travel a lot. Every day I'd drop them off and I said precisely the same thing. One more step in the journey of discovering where your deep joy intersects the world's deep needs. I swear I said this to them, Adam. They prefer to take the bus, as you might guess. They don't want to hear that from their father. But my point is, we have to start with our deep joy, not the world's deep needs, because the world's deep needs are infinite, unfathomable. There's no bottom to that well. But what is our deep joy? For that intern, they're trying to discover, do my aspirations fit the deep, does my deep joy fit with the deep needs of this company? And if the answer is no, that's a great outcome. We always talk about the interns who came on board and stayed, and they're the superstars. That's great, as long as they're following their deep joy and not someone else's. So, CEO of Me Inc., leading, the work begins within, is understanding, what's my deep joy? Am I staying true to that deep joy?
Well, that's a lovely way to end this episode. And you have to excuse me for coughing in the background, Tom.
No worries. I've just come off that myself.
I know. What can you do? This is live recording for you. How do people get in touch with you, Tom, if they want to carry on the conversation?
Well, basically just reach out directly to me. My email is ThomMayerMD@gmail. Reluctantly, I do have a website, ThomMayerMD.com. But I'll give you my cell phone. People can text me or call me, 703-403-4147. That's a U.S. number. My deep joy is helping others find their deep joy. So people cringe when I give out all that personal information, but nothing would please me more than if your listeners reach out in some way, large or small. If I can help them, that would be a great honor.
Well, I appreciate it. And that's the first time that we've had that kind of openness in relation to, get in touch. We'll also put, we'll also put a link in for the book so people know how to do that as well,
Great.
How to connect with that. And here's the most unfair question out of everything that you've experienced and all that you've written and all that you've read. Is there a really standout piece of leadership advice that you've given or received that's at the forefront of your thinking?
Well, we didn't rehearse this, by the way, for your listeners.
We certainly haven't.
I'm a huge fan of Churchill's for a lot of different reasons. But one piece of advice is, and you're familiar with his great quote, that Russia is a riddle wrapped inside a mystery, inside an enigma, the leadership enigma. Now, if you said, what is Churchill saying? Based on that quote, you'd say, you can't predict what Russia will do. But here's the full quote. I cannot predict to you what Russia will do. It is a riddle wrapped inside a mystery, inside an enigma. But then he said, but perhaps there is a key. That key is Russian national interest. Now he's saying, if you can understand what's in that person, that country, that organization's national interest, personal interest, business interest, deep joy, I would say, you can always predict what they'll do. So, I think that's just great advice, understanding the enigmatic but catalytic, enzymatic nature of life and therefore of leading by taking a combined experience and being able to say, maybe if we figure out what motivates people, if we know them and can understand their deep joy, I think we're going to find that our world is a better place.
Thom, I appreciate that. And as you say, that's certainly, we haven't rehearsed that, but what a wonderful answer to a final question. Listen, this was very much worthy of the wait to have you on the show. And I just want to say a massive thank you for you taking the time out to really be our first episode of the new year. So I'm incredibly grateful to you. And just want to say a massive thank you, Thom, for being on the Leadership Enigma.
Thank you. You're doing me an honor by doing it. And if we decide to do it again, I will come across the pond to make sure that we can meet face to face and enjoy that as well.
Well, that would be a great pleasure. And we're going to take you up on that offer. You have to let us know when you'll be in sunny London and you'll come into the studio here and we'll have another conversation. But Thom, thank you so much. This has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
An honor. Thanks.
Join us again next week for more curiosity and insight with the Leadership Enigma. We'd love to hear your comments on today's show as well as suggestions for future topics and guests. Get in touch with me on LinkedIn or visit us at www.leadersenigma.com. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe on all your major podcast platforms and on our dedicated YouTube channel. Thanks again for joining the community.